Jewish people will never have sufficient words or actions to remember and honor these heroes. As much as we try, we will never be able to help the families over their loss.
That was what it sounded like in Israel on Thursday at an early memorial service for fallen soldiers. But this one was held in a forest outside of Jerusalem at the site of a monument to the 450-plus fallen soldiers from Canada and the U.S. who've died defending the State of Israel, and also the English-speaking immigrants who were victims of terrorism. This year, they also added the names of the 8 Canadian civilians murdered by Hamas on October 7th. The memorial is lovingly cared for by the Association for Americans and Canadians in Israel and the JNF. Israel's much larger national Yom ha-Zikaron Memorial Day is Sunday night Monday, and it's much different than in previous years, marked in a much more muted way because the country's still in the midst of its longest war since the founding of the State of Israel. And watching it all are Canadians Yoram and Ariel Sharon and Henry Balaban. The 3 Toronto Friends are veterans of the Yom Kippur War, a war they say has eerie similarities to the one Israel's in now. 50 years ago, on October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria launched their surprise attacks on Israel. Henry was a foot soldier with the Golani brigade. He drove north to defend the country from the Syrian onslaught. Yoram drove south and joined his tank unit. He would be one of the first armored crews to cross over the Suez Canal and into Egypt. The 3 Israeli veterans moved to Canada after, built new lives, families, successful careers, and they've been watching what has happened to Israel before and since October 7th.
To talk about the war and really in honor and reminding people of the fallen soldiers on that particular day 50 years ago, to talk about them, to mention them so people don't forget.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, May the 14th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News for Yom ha-Zikaron.
I can't date women right now because I'm too busy calling myself a piece of shit.
I had a dysfunctional Jewish mother and I had a dysfunctional Native mother.
I had 25 full years of utter struggle and failure.
I started to realize the absurdity of my inability to let go of this monster of guilt.
Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Hi, I'm Ralph Ben-Marie. I'm the host of Not That Kind of Rabbi, where we look at people's spiritual journeys and take a little time for their self-reflection, and maybe yours. You can get it all at the cjn.ca/NTKR or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, last fall, on October 4th, I sat down in Yoram Shalmon's Toronto home to interview him, his wife Rachel, who also served in the IDF's intelligence branch in 1973, and Henry Balaban, their veteran friend. Until now, they'd kept their war memories private all these years, but because it was coming up to the 50th anniversary of their war, they were motivated to finally speak publicly about it. And in doing so, perhaps come to terms a bit more with what they did as the generation bonded by the Yom Kippur War. Henry Balaban is now 75, a real estate broker, the child of Polish Holocaust survivors. Yoram Shalmon is 72. He graduated from the Technion in electrical engineering, came to Canada and did an MBA at the U of T and worked for Bell and other tech firms. Rachel was a financial analyst in Israel, then in Canada, a Hebrew teacher. We talked for hours about the fear while they were being fired on, the comrades they lost in battle, and their worries about Israel's political division and the street protests against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last year that were tearing the country apart. But I had to put our interview into storage because 3 days later was October 7th. So today, we'll hear that interview now, and Yoram and Henry join me for a fresh, updated conversation, especially for Israel's Memorial Day. So you went to the South, and I want you to tell our listeners a bit about your feelings when you arrived there and what you saw, just when you first arrived.
Yes. So for me, personally, it was the first time I did my reserve service, so first time in the unit still. Everything was okay, and within few hours, we were heading toward the Suez Canal on we didn't wait for carriers. We were just sent straight forward. I would say it's about 300 kilometers. Took us until the next day.
So what was your job? Were you a driver? Were you a loader? What did you do?
No, I was the second in command. And later on, I was number one.
How many people were in the...
Between about 10, because we were all really the blue-collar workers that load and shoot, load and shoot. And even 10 was not really enough. When we went into, as we arrived to the Suez Canal, we went into ongoing shooting to block the Egyptians that were coming forward. So for maybe 48 hours non-stop, we were just shooting and moving and shooting and moving. So you needed every able body to really be able, because there was unloading of shells from trucks. They were bringing them forward, sorting them, loading them. For proportion, Israel had about 60 cannons along the whole Suez Canal when the war started. The Egyptian had over 2,000. You talk about 30, 40 times more, if my math is okay.
Did you actually know when you were in the middle of it, either of you, what the whole situation was, that Israel was going to be maybe even lose the first 2 days? How aware were you of what was really happening in the big picture?
In my area, we were in the fog of the war, absolutely. No idea even what our shooting meant, who were we shooting and so on. Later on, our commander, who was in the front line, came back all excited and thankful. We said we blocked the Egyptians from advancing. So we were just there, like dumb little robots, just shooting and taking that's it. Yeah. Only later we got some perspective about what was our contribution.
But I mean also in terms of the seriousness of the threat to Israel's existence. At the beginning, did you know the first day that it could have been the end of Israel, like how bad things were?
I had a transistor radio, the odd person, and there were two stations, I think, Galitzal and Kol Israel, and you heard the official
propaganda.
Well, no, they were.
No, they weren't.
For instance, they didn't say that we lost the Hermon. No. That was never told, never broadcasted. But I wasn't sure where I was. I didn't know what's happening 1 kilometer from me. We're traveling at night. I don't know where. I don't know why. People shoot. I don't know if we're shooting at each other sometimes. I don't think that at our level we had an overall picture, and I don't think that where we were, I think that people up top were much more pessimistic than we were.
And I don't think that it would have helped anyway. I mean, just think about us being there, and then, if suddenly you will get the notion that Tel Aviv is under attack and your family, your mother or your wife or your kids are in life danger, there was no point even in getting us to that level of awareness.
I don't think that the Syrians and Egyptians the same. They didn't have a plan. They never in the wildest dreams thought they'll conquer Israel, so they didn't have plans for conquering Israel. They had plans to just breach the border, go 5-10 kilometers, and that was it. And I'll tell you another thing, because Israel didn't have good defense plans for the Golan Heights, nor in the Sinai. There wasn't a defense plan for the IDF in the Sinai. Because in their wildest dream, they didn't think that Egypt will ever dare to attack.
The guys that were positioned in Yom Kippur were, in a way, like the scapegoats from Yom Kippur that are sent to the desert to lekaper al avonam shel bnei Israel. They carried and they paid for the concept and so on that was going on. They were the sacrificial lamb in a way. I'm sorry to say it, and it's not exactly the same case, but I think the first 24 hours, 800 or 1,000 soldiers died, just brute force of the attacks.
If I recall, we just grabbed ourselves and started going up the mountain.
Yeah.
I don't think we waited to be told where to go, what to do, just that we knew convoy of tanks, vehicles going up, and ambulances and burned out equipment coming down on a road that's one lane, barely, 2 lanes.
Well, the bottleneck in my case was the crossing the bridge to Africa. My story about my brother is that he was designated and knew his role will be part of the people that will be leading the bridge to cross the canal. That was his designation. And so I never
know he was there.
I didn't know anything. And then we were the first really formal battalion that went across the Suez Canal. As we came to the bridge, which was hectic, rickety thing that moved across, they would basically get one vehicle at a time across. And I was waiting there to be launched across, and then I heard my twin brother standing on the bridge. He was the officer in command of getting the vehicle across. And so of course, I recognized his voice, even that my head was down. I mean, the place was under shelling. So we just had, a sentence about just write to mom, everything okay, and we moved. And then we crossed the bridge and were parked for the night in a place called the airport of Dwar Swar. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. Anyway, airport of Dwar Swar. And so from there, I saw how the bridge was being bombarded. And he saw how the airport was being bombarded. So also each of us being aware that his brother is under fire. But thank God we both came okay. He told me that from his military police unit that worked in the bridge area, there were a lot of casualties.
A lot of the veterans now have been meeting and having ceremonies in Israel. Have you done anything here?
No, and over the years, we didn't speak as friends about this war much.
It's a taboo.
Why?
Cultural avoidance. You don't want to show your feather. You don't want to poke at sensitive points. It just became a unspoken taboo.
I think first it's a war that Israel didn't win. Israel didn't win the war. Yeah, we can always talk about what is winning a war. I don't know if anybody wins any wars, but I know there's in every war there's a lot of losers. But Israel finished the war with a ceasefire agreement with Syria and a ceasefire agreement with Egypt. The war for us never ended at the end of the war. There was war which was not reported well in Israel. In Israel, it was people completely were not even aware of what we call Milchemet HaAtasha Ktana.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That was really terrible. How many people in our unit died after the war? 50? I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy. Like, it was reminded me of the attrition war. It was no different. 67 was euphoria. Even though there were a lot of casualties in 67, we forget that. And this is a war where arrogance lost. Vanity, arrogance lost.
I agree that was, in 73, there was a lot of arrogance. The intelligence was there. I was there. And I knew from my daily work what's going on. We knew that artillery is advancing in my area, like from Egypt and from Jordan, and they are moving their air force, the airplanes and their troops and getting ready from all directions. And it was known to everybody. I was not a big shot in the army, and there was arrogance from the leaders. And kind of, they could not believe that it's going to happen.
How has that left you feeling all these years?
Frustrated. Again, there is like this thing, that taboo, that you don't talk about it between Israelis, between friends, and definitely not family, because there's such sense of pride of our army, and but I was definitely frustrated. I lost a lot of friends from my unit who were in the Hermon. They were caught and captured, and near Egypt they were captured. Some did not come back. There is a disappointment in leadership, kind of, because this is scary when the information is there and what you do with it. So what's the point? You know, my father, he was so proud of me serving in the army as a Holocaust survivor. You know, he was in the Palmach, he was in the IDF too. And when I went to the army, he was so proud. So there was never a complaint. My father was fighting, he would come back home, he saw terrible things, he never spoke about it. And same with us.
Your intelligence unit, 8200, has been very public in the current Israel political democracy movement. The veterans are saying that they're against the reforms, and they've threatened to not serve in the reserves. And I wondered what that means to you 50 years later when you see your own intelligence 8200, which is very famous, taking that stand during current political problems.
First of all, I feel very strongly about what's going on in Israel. I'm very much absorbed into it, and I feel very strongly against the judicial reform that Bibi and Levin are trying to do. I feel that they are really leading Israel to ruin. And I really want the listeners, if that gets to them, to get themselves educated and take a position, rather than kind of say, okay, you guys, solve it among yourself, we are here to support you, etc. I think it's on the border of a catastrophe, what's happening in Israel.
Tomorrow, if the war broke at 73, these people will be the first ones to go. The first one. These people, the pilot that said, we're not going to training, they'll be the first one. They're the elite of the elite. Now the rhetoric, some people that object, call them traitors. Mm-hmm. And so I think that divisive language by itself is toxic. And I tell you, the toughest thing in Israel now, or for a Jew, is not to be on either side. I don't think that average Canadians understand the subtleties, and they say, okay, another bad thing. Israel's bad again? Okay, but Israel's bad. Okay, so we know Israel's bad. Now even Israelis tell us they're bad. Now a helicopter pilot tells us that we're shooting Palestinian babies. They denied it all years. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. It's time for the cool heads to prevail and try to negotiate. Look, hey, we negotiated a peace agreement with Egypt. We cannot negotiate a peace agreement with people who live in Beersheba.
Why did you decide that it was something you wanted to do, that you wanted to speak about? Because I've understood that you haven't really spoken before about this publicly. So.
I waited 50 years. I felt that after 50 years, it's time to try to move on. And because for me, a lot of stuff, things stayed still for 50 years, certain aspects. Now it's time to move on.
And then when Henry approached me, I thought that it is the honorable thing to do.
What do you want our listeners to understand about the 50th anniversary and what it's meant to you personally, as you've sort of been talking about it and thinking about it more than you ever have before, right?
Remember those who did the ultimate sacrifice, who sacrificed their lives, who lost their lives, and thinking about their families, because those people who sacrificed their lives, they're gone. But the families who lost those people, they live, and they have to live with it, with the pain. And So my heart is with them, and I hope that there will be no more wars. And we all want to live in peace.
That was an Israeli army rabbi blessing the troops just a few days ago near Gaza before they went out on a mission to liberate the hostages and destroy the terrorist tunnels. They had the sound of a blast of a ram's horn to inspire them on the way, while across Israel Monday it was sirens sounding rather than ram's horns as the country paused for a minute of silence during the annual Memorial Day for the fallen and the victims of terror. There were numerous public observances at military cemeteries across Israel, a very public spectacle of shared grief, so different from what veterans Yoram Shalmon and Henry Balaban came home to after serving in the Yom Kippur War. They join me now. It's good to see you again. Welcome back.
Good to see you too.
How have you been since October 7th? What's been like just in general for each of you? Yoram, you want to start?
Been okay so far. Initially, I was involved with some volunteering organizations.
What were you volunteering for?
A helpline for people in Israel. And they figured that they need a lot of help to people that are suffering trauma and so on. And they are running out of resources. So they are organizing in Australia and in North America support group that will be able to man the helplines during the night hours in Israel, because there's so many people there who are suffering mental traumas.
What about yourself, Henry? How have you been since October 7th?
Well, on October 6th, I had a heart surgery. A day after our interview, like not a big one. So I was up when my brother sent me a text or whatever, war broke. So since then, I've been glued to Israeli media and all other media.
Could you have imagined that we would be talking in Israel's longest ever war since 1948, that it would last so long?
Of course not. It's surprising everybody every day that this is still going on. The revenge phase have gone long time ago. We're going to avenge the attack and our casualties and make sure that they will not have the appetite or the wish to do it again. And that has finished, a good 4 or 5 months ago. But the war itself, exit strategy, is always the most difficult one in wars. Starting is easy, then it takes years.
When you were serving, either of you, your war was, 2.5 weeks?
But of course, it was a whole different experience, a whole different scenario. There was almost no civilians involved in Yom Kippur, almost none. We didn't have to defend them. We didn't have to deal with it. We were fighting armies in the Golan Heights, Syrians, Iraqis, Moroccans, and we dealt with armies that were organized and had the chain of command. It was different here that you're fighting an organization that is not bound by any rules. I don't know if you can even call it a war. You envision war between two armies. This is like a war on a cartel or war on an organization that doesn't abide by any rules except their own rules. That makes it different.
I hate to compare, but I'm going to do it anyway. When you talked about numbers, the IDF reports that about 600 Israeli soldiers have been killed since October 7th, on the day and since in the fighting in Gaza as well. And in the Yom Kippur War, the number was much, much larger. How do you explain that?
The war itself, after the first couple of days, was basically Israel going on with tanks and bombs and airplanes and just, grinding Gaza down. So yes, they have some fighters, and yes, they would step out and shoot RPGs and so on. But Israeli force were maybe 100 times bigger, stronger, more organized, and more lethal than the Hamas. It is not right now a war of two equal powers or somewhat equal powers. Israel army and the Hamas are in a different league. However, of course, they have their own advantages, which are, which is why the war has not been finished. There is, 1.5 to 2 million civilians around. That makes the whole thing different. So it's not a war of two equal powers, and which is why the casualties, as tough and as hard as they are not even close to the Yom Kippur War.
I don't think that the discussion should be about numbers. Who remembers the war of attrition? Hundreds of Israeli soldiers died in the war of attrition. Nobody even remembers that. 67, the big win. Hundreds of Israeli soldiers died in the 60-day war in 1 week. Also, I tell you, the army of 73 is different than the army of 2023, 2024. Over the years, Israel army became, they said, small and smart. Well, it didn't become small in terms of manpower. More units became HR, legal, PR people, less tanks, less armored vehicles, but more people walking around and doing things. In the 73, it was lean and mean, and it was less lawyered up. Now the hands of the military are tied. Everything they do, they need an okay for some legal authority. In the Yom Kippur War, basically Sharon went and crossed the Suez Canal against all orders. Now a military commander cannot do anything, even with the orders. So the whole structure, the whole atmosphere, everything is now complicated. I wouldn't want to be a military commander in the IDF.
But we also have to take in perspective that if the numbers are correct, in Gaza, in general terms, 10,000 fighters and 20,000 civilians were killed. And that is with all the supervision and oversighting that Henry is talking about. So does it mean that without it, it would have been 40,000 civilians? Honestly, I do not know. I don't think that killing 20,000 is going to necessarily make the Arabs or the Palestinians suddenly accept Israel as a fact, because there are 2 million behind them. I don't think that killing 10,000 fighters is going to make the Arabs going on their knees, because if you think about it, these 10,000 fighters that were killed have cousins, nephews, nieces, you name it. There's 2 million of them, and the birth rate, let's say that a third of the population there is under 25. Well, that gives you a good over 500,000 of potential fighters, which are just going to be a question of time to train them, to arm them, and so on. So any way you look at it, it's very tough.
Did you want to add something about that, Henry, to respond to what he said?
There are different opinions. I think that the first two casualties in this war was the truth and the trust. I don't think that you any longer trust any numbers, any information, regardless if it comes from Hamas, from Gaza, from the IDF generals. Everybody is here to cover their behind. I don't trust anything I hear anymore. Having said that, I didn't see anybody come up with a better solution for Jews long term. What, we're going to keep waiting for the Dutch and the Swedes to protect us, to tell us how to behave? We are in the Middle East. Let's not forget it. We are not in Canada. We're not in PEI. We are in Gaza and Israel. And the code of conduct there is different. So we should stop behaving like Dutch and Swedes in the Middle East. I want to go back to what you said before about the Yom Kippur War in comparison. In the Yom Kippur War, when the war broke, was midday Saturday. Immediately, the IDF was engaged in war with the Syrians and the Egyptians. Here, the first day, the IDF was not engaged in war. There were units of the IDF without any control or command, individuals in uniform that left homes and took guns and ran to, and policemen. the IDF was not in the picture.
Let's talk about that if you don't mind. You said the IDF wasn't there, and it seemed like the country's trust in the IDF to protect them is no longer the same. Is that how you feel now? And how does that go forward? How do Israelis trust their army now?
You know what? Historically, the IDF always was very good at reviewing operations and drawing conclusions on how things should get better, improve the practices and procedures. Historically, the IDF does not punish or expose necessarily people that failed in their duties. You know what? There's a blame. A lot of people blame the IDF, the chief of the IDF, blame Netanyahu, blame. I want to tell you, as someone who, under my command, there were anytime between 40, 80 people. If you are 100 meters from this Gazan border, and most of your unit is in pajamas at 4 a.m, it's not the chief of the army's fault, it's not Netanyahu's fault, it's the fault is localized. The whole culture was not functioning. The culture was off. And for that reason, it needs a big revamp rather than identify 1 or 2 people and hang them on a tree. I don't think it's going to benefit a lot, but I don't know if the country is ready for anything. Right now, the most important in my mind is some semblance of unity. Just some. I'm not saying love and hugs. Some sort of a feel that there's a common goal here and everybody wants to get there together.
I want to focus now personally on the fallen soldiers. This is Yom ha-Zikaron. So I'd like to know if we can have an opportunity, if either of you would like to tell us a bit about some of the people you lost.
On my side, there are quite a number of them on the periphery. I mean, people that I knew, one good friend of mine that was under the same bombardment that I was on the Egyptian side, and he died from his wound. So that's the one which is very close to me.
What was his name? We should know his name.
Meir Schwarzman. Yeah. It was 50 years ago as well, and time really has a healing effect.
And I know, Henry, there's a mountain, Har Dov, named after someone you were close to.
He was my immediate commander, but he didn't die in Yom Kippur War. He died in 1970 from a shrapnel on Jabal Ross, which was a Mount Ross, which was named after him as Har Dov. I left Israel after the Yom Kippur War, and so people that died, I was never involved in I knew them, I knew names, but I never went to see the families and so on, because I think it was different. We didn't go and visit the grave sites in Yom ha-Zikaron. I don't think as young people that we used to do it. I think it's a bigger event now where people go and it's part of the culture more. At the time, you know what? Okay, my neighbor's son died in the war and everybody felt sorry for them and we moved on. It wasn't, I don't remember in Yom ha-Zikaron doing anything special. Of course we were somber and so on, but we didn't. Now there's a lot of ceremonies. And
Yoram, is that your experience as well?
Yes, there's more of appreciation in the way of the heroism that happened now, while maybe in Yom Kippur it was taken as a matter of fact. And here now, you open the paper and you read about this guy and that guy and how great he was and how, salt of the earth he was and so on. The casualties were not talked about and embossed into life, maybe as much as they are over here.
Well, the family's grief is broadcasted right the day of the Shiva. They interview the parents, the brothers, the cousins. I tell you, I had a good friend in high school who died in the 73 Yom Kippur War. I didn't even know about it for a few years later. They had in the paper at the time the list of, but it wasn't Our parents came from many of them came from Europe or from Arab countries, where they lost a lot of people. So the loss of lives, they would rather not talk about. They wanted to forget and move forward. I think that now it's completely different, the whole approach towards, and it's probably suitable for these times,
If I may say so, I think it's kind of started in the Vietnam War, where there was extreme coverage by the networks, and war became a streaming event. And certainly now with the battles in Israel. So people binge on it because it's just been streamed to your living room in real life.
Have you watched it?
Yes, I have to personally try to put borders and limits, or it just takes over your life and we have to protect ourselves in a way. Yes.
Yom Kippur War, I don't think Israel won the war. There was this ceasefire. I don't think that we won the war. I don't know if we lost the war. But right now we lost big time. And this time we dragged the whole diaspora with us. I mean, Jews all over the world are the casualties of this war. The IDF didn't really lose any battle, but we lost the big war. The big picture is lost, it's gone, and now Jews all over the world are paying the price. So the IDF in Israel, that was supposed to be the protector, savior for all the Jews in the world, by its failure, it's rubbing off on people in other countries. So I think that going and mulling over and interviewing families, and they've told us about what the aspirations of a 25-year-old were. I mean, it's very important, but right now, I think we have to move forward, go to some resolution. Right now, it doesn't seem to be the situation.
Lastly, when you were called up in 1973 to go and save your country from, it was an existential war. They were swarming over and Israel was at threat. What advice would you give to the soldiers of the IDF today, these young kids and even older ones who have to go into the tunnels? As soldiers yourselves who did this 51 years ago, is there anything you would advise these young soldiers to keep in mind when they are maybe entering Rafah as we speak? Or in the north, in Hezbollah?
I think you're right that their conflicts are probably much worse than what we had, because we did it at the time because we shoot at the Egyptians and the Egyptians shoot at us. So we had no choice. Here you have units that are entering into Gaza and see in front of them, as well as the Hamas fighters, terrorists, they see also the human cost to civilization. And they go in and they risk their life, they give their life because of their friends, because they are there for each other to do the job. But the job that they are doing is a dirty job. My advice to them will be it's going to be over, you're doing it, you hate it, try to maintain your humanity through it. It's ugly, but you have no choice.
Thank you. What about you, Henry? What would you tell a young fighter today?
First, I agree with Yoram. I would encourage them not to be lost in the moment. There are civilians there, the children. Sometimes to be human, you have to risk your own life. It's very difficult. I would warn them to be super cautious, not be gung-ho, in light of the high percentage of friendly fire. Some people estimate that 25% or 30% of all casualties are due to friendly fire. To be super careful, because once it happens, you're walking dead. It's game over for you. But the last and most important that I would tell everyone that goes to battle, they may not be aware of it, but I think they have to have a candid conversation with their family and say, I'm going to war, and when I come back, I will look the same, I'll have the same name, but I'll be a different person. Maybe a person hard to live with, maybe the person that has anger management issues. When I come back from this war, there'll be a different me. I hope you'll still accept me the way I come back. Nobody can go through these tunnels. Even if you didn't see one Hamas fighter in the tunnel, go through this anxiety and fear and come back the same person you walked into the tunnel. Once you walk into one of these tunnels, you didn't have to face the Hamas. When you come out, you're a different person. That level of pressure and fear that you experience in this type of war is 10 times worse than we experienced. I remember that my first order in the war in 73 was to conquer an anti-tank station there, and you had to go to the trenches and clear them from Syrians. The fear before we even entered the trench could kill a horse. The anxiety, the stress level. To my luck, I didn't have to do it. Eventually, they brought a tank, cleared it. But that fear, that pressure, you live with it 50 years later. So I would tell these soldiers, you are not coming back. When you went in, you went one way, and you're coming back another way. The trauma may not show up right away. Maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, one day you'll catch yourself smacking your kid, yelling at your spouse, and that happens. So I would tell everybody, I think there's a great awareness in Israel about it.
Yeah.
Yoram just alluded that he's going to get involved.
That's right. We have somebody who's the answer to some of that right here on the podcast.
But
you have your work cut out for you for the rest of your life, for this generation, the Gaza generation, right? The October 7th generation.
The families and the soldiers, they have to deal with a whole new situation.
Yeah. We'll leave it there for now. I want to thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your experiences and your advice. It was good to talk to you again.
Thank you, Elaine.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. The CJN Daily is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. If you want to browse the list of North Americans memorialized at the AACI's memorial site outside Jerusalem, I've put the link in our show notes, and also a link to watch that memorial ceremony, and one where you can learn more about the mental health hotline, which Yoram Shalmon volunteers for. It's called Iran. Thanks for listening to the CJN Daily.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.